During the summer of 1973, Alamitos Bay was a haven for families and teenagers looking to cool off. Happy screams broke out on the beach, along with music and a sunshiny perfume. In the crowd that day was a bunch of teenagers, including 17-year-old Susan Parsons. She was a dynamic and freewheeling person, someone who had loved the sea. What she and her friends got to the beach early, set up a prime lawn site close to water, and swam, played volleyball under sun summer all day. By mid-afternoon, the crew needed a break and plopped down on towels to talk. Susan, however, was restless, up until that day when the tide was high and churned by gentle onshore winds of perhaps 10 knots. Rita had been a strong swimmer who loved to body surf in just such conditions. When her friends warned the mum of four about strong currents, Susan went for one last swim before they left. With a friendly wave for their worries, she told them she would be soon. Sue waded into the ocean, its water cool against her sunburned skin. Wading up to her waist, she dove under a wave, filling her ears with the sound of salt water that blocked out everything happening on shore. All was calm for a minute or two. Thrilled by the strength of ocean, she emerged with salt clinging to her skin from the spray that chased after each wave. They were all further out on the water when she swam away, immersed in silence. But then, something changed. That was when Susan felt something snap against her leg. Initially, she thought it was simply the way of TGE current, but as she swam to shore, trying to get some purchase in THD sand below her feet, freed that there had been enough time. Still, panic set in as she tried to pull away, and the more she fought against it, the tighter its grip. Glancing towards the beach, they were much farther out than she realized, and in a panic waved to friends sitting under swathes of tapestries meant for shade. Something seemed off. Susan's friends waved to her from the beach, but thought she might be pulling a silly joke. But it wasn't until one of them noticed that she was far further out than any person should be. Did they realize something? Anyone that had even made a rudimentary glance at the weather forecast for Montauk knew just enough to pierce together what was wrong. They were shouting to her, but they sounded like the roaring of waves. In seconds, Susan was over the side, and her head disappeared underwater. The lifeguards were immediately notified, and then a search began in earnest. The Coast Guard had boats and divers out, even helicopters searching the area, but no sign of Susan. For example, the water was colder than usual and experienced strange temperature drops that could not be justified by simple weather changes. After one of the searches, searchers said they distinctly felt what they described as a brush against their legs underwater, but told no other was there upon inspection. Minutes became hours, and hope slowly disappeared the more time that passed. The search was called shortening when the sun set, and by nightfall they'd to tell Susan's family. Her parents, though, were in disbelief, struggling to understand how their daughter, who had simply evaporated. For weeks, they came back to that beach each and every day, hoping against hope for a miracle. But Susan was never recovered. Rumors began circulating what might have become of Susan as the years went by. Some thought she was dragged under by a deadly rip current, but others murmured of darker things that lurked beneath the surface. When Susan vanished, fishermen said they sighted peculiar dark forms moving underwater off the coast, and some even went so far as to insist that one late night on Lonely Beach, their cries for help from beneath brisk winds. The creepiest stories were from those who went alone in the dark to the beach. There were many eyewitnesses to the fact that on the shore stood a figure. This was a young girl in swimming clothes, lost looking at nothing. If one came close, she would turn and walk into the water to drown without a single ripple. Many more swore they heard her calling out on the wind itself, a cry for help that reverberated through the desolate sand. Though the case was subject to multiple investigations and later, even modern sonar technology, Susan Parsons' body has never been found. It is one of Alamitos Bay's enduring unknowns, a tragic reminder that the ocean can be fickle and unforgiving. Some local villagers think the beach is cursed, that it has places where life and the afterlife overlap, and those who perish at sea might be condemned to roam for eternity. Catalina Island in Southern California is cherished for its landscapes, clear waters, and historical sites. Among its prosaic points, none are less attended than Smugglers Cove, remote and sinister. The 18th/19th century pirates and smugglers, which used the cove as a hideout legend, say that those have killed to guard their ill-gotten gains are still with us in spirit form, forever seeking our money. College students from UCLA, Mark Henderson and Lisa Martin, decided to explore the island on their summer break, August 4th, 1997. With so many miles under their belt, Quigley and Macmillan were history buffs and paranormalists in love with the idea of Smugglers Cove. They had read his stories about the apparition of the cove and been eager to see it themselves. They got to the island by mid-afternoon and rented a dinghy that they rowed out to the secret cove. It was a gorgeous trip through the water, glistening in the summer sun and surrounded with massive cliffs on all around. Upon arrival to Smugglers Cove, they were taken aback by its strange loveliness. There was nobody on the beach, just tall cliffs as far as I could see, and part of an old stone building, which looked like it was falling into rubble with all the overgrown plants. After setting up camp, Mark and Lisa wandered aloud through the ancient wilderness, picturing life as if they had been smugglers. Rusty chains, bottles, and cobweb-covered piece of what looked like a shipwreck had been uncovered, buried in the sand. Those powerful moments lingered, as though the past was just awaiting to breathe in life and allow its heartbeats synchronized with ours. At nightfall, they made a campfire and prepared dinner whilst sharing ghost stories until the sun set behind the horizon. The cove that had enveloped them so invitingly during the day now seemed to tighten on all sides. The waves crashing against the shore seemed louder than normal, and a long dark shadow had draped rather ominously across one half of the beach from where they stood at its center. At some point soon after, close to midnight, and with the fire nearly out, they saw a fog creeping off of the ocean. The weather was mild all day, and the sky clear. As the fog crept down into the cove, visibility became 2 feet. Suddenly the air took on a chill, and in minutes from a smooth sea came up with an angry churn. Then the noises started. At first it was just a light whisper on the wind, but soon they whipped harder. Voices, 4 gin ones filled with urgency. Mark and Lisa exchanged frightened glances as their facade slowly dimmed. Perhaps we were too confident after that extra coaching session baffled us for an hour, but there seemed to be something fishy about this last, methodically straightforward strategy, despite how it felt at the start. The whispers were accompanied by the noise of footsteps on gravelly sand, approaching gradually closer. Then the noises started. At first it was just a light whisper on the wind, but soon they whipped harder. Voices, 4 gin ones filled with urgency. Mark and Lisa exchanged frightened glances as their facade slowly dimmed. Perhaps we were too confident after that extra coaching session baffled us for an hour, but there seemed to be something fishy about this last, methodically straightforward strategy, despite how it felt at the start. The whispers were accompanied by the noise of footsteps on gravelly sand, approaching gradually closer. Mark grabbed a flashlight pointing it in the direction of a sound, but its beam appeared to be absorbed by laughter. The sounds of the footsteps grew nearer. Tim saw them, ghostly figures approaching out from behind clouds in quantities he could not begin to count. Arms raised as if they had but a single intention. Men in ragged, antiquated clothes, grave desires, this lifeless gauntness. Some had lanterns that burned with an ethereal flame, while others heaved chains through the air. She let out a scream as one of the figures pushed itself off its knees to stand, hollow eyes staring down at her while silent words tried to form in its hungry mouth. Mark could only stare in terror at the phantoms of dead pirates still marching towards them with slow, deliberate steps. The chill deepened, their breath frosting the air around them as both cold and smell vying for dominance. The fire, which had died down to nothing more than embers, all at once burst with a blinding light before the darkness of dead cinders. Mark and Lisa took off toward their tent, but the ghosts were on all sides of them. The shadow of the chain that tied the lanterns playfully danced on uneven stones. A sorrowful moan was heard from above. They dropped what they had been carrying and began the long scramble up toward the cliffs surrounding their newfound cove. Although the fog was too thick to see much, they could hear the ethereal creatures chasing after them. And then when they believed they had been trapped, the mist started to dissolve into sun rays and daybreak. Mark and Lisa sat shivering on the ground, ghosts appearing, then melting away beneath them with each new daybreak. Racing back to their boat, the couple eventually arrived safely in Avalon and reported being of how they were terrorized. The locals scoffed at their story, for the lore of Smugglers Cove was known amongst all. When they went back to the cove that same day to get their stuffs, they saw something even more scary, an animal or whatever tore up and just threw everything from inside of their tent like a wild creature. There were no marks of walking feet in the sand to reveal someone else may have passed by. However, they had located chains beside a set earlier that was missing. Mark and Lisa have never returned to Smugglers Cove. They advise anyone who will listen not to come, especially when it starts getting dark. The cove is still a must-visit spot for adventure loving